With a young girl named Naoto Mashiro, a high school student who dreamed of going on dates and experiencing everything related to romantic life, she was absorbed in her phone, watching the romantic interaction between two young people. She longed to experience something like that someday. However, after reflecting on it, Mashiro quickly felt depressed, convinced that something like that would never be possible for her. She saw herself as a small girl with a somber expression, something she had known for certain for as long as she could remember. Even her family used to say that her eyes were strange, frightening, and cloudy, which truly scared those who looked at them. With all this, Mashiro was convinced she could never even get a boyfriend. Contrary to expectations, as she walked down the school corridor later, Mashiro encountered the boy she had been observing moments earlier. He suddenly approached her, confessed his feelings, and asked her out. Leaving Mashiro completely surprised by his unexpected confession, moments later, she was wondering if she could really have a boyfriend. She was stunned, sitting on the stairs near the school entrance, where the boy had asked her to meet him to hear her response. On the other hand, Mashiro couldn't comprehend the situation. Osei, the young man who had confessed to her, was the most attractive in the class, and up until that moment, they had never even spoken. She had even thought he was dating Kaido, her classmate. Mashiro questioned if what she was experiencing was a miracle. Having a boyfriend was a dream she had long given up on, but now it seemed possible. Mashiro imagined everything they could do together, the things she longed for, and she began to look forward to it with great anticipation. It was in that moment, as she lost herself in her fantasies, that she realized something. She considered the possibility that Osei and Kaido might be tricking her, perhaps betting that she would wait for him, believing her to be desperate. Just thinking about it made her feel an intense urge to hit them. As she reflected on this, she was interrupted by Osei, who had just arrived. Surprised, she asked if he was alone, and he confirmed that he was. Then, with a smile, he expressed his happiness at finding her there. Although things had not gone as she expected, Mashiro still resisted letting her guard down, wondering if instead of a bet or a prank, Osei might be trying to get something from her. With this thought in mind, she decided to clarify his intentions quickly. So she asked why he had chosen her. Osei replied that it was a very direct and sudden question, but he didn't hesitate to say it was because her eyes were beautiful, those big eyes that seemed to absorb everything they looked at. This unexpected response left Mashiro completely stunned. Curious, she stepped closer to him, staring intently, and said it was the first time she had heard something like that. Skeptical, she asked if he was joking with her. Not knowing exactly how to react, the boy tried to explain himself further. He told her that at the beginning of the year, while walking down the corridor, he had dropped a notebook, and she had bent down to pick it up. When she returned it to him, she had looked at him intently, and that gaze, he confessed, had been etched into his mind ever since. No matter how much he tried to forget it, he couldn't get it out of his head. Mashiro, upon hearing the story, remembered that at that moment, she had indeed stared at him because she thought it would be nice to date someone as handsome as him. However, before she could fully process this memory, the boy, visibly nervous, added in a slightly raised tone that, in other words, what he was trying to say was that it had been love at first sight. Faced with that declaration, Mashiro shook her head, arguing that everyone felt scared when they looked into her eyes. That's when Osei calmly commented that perhaps no one had truly noticed the beautiful girl she was. He added that he considered himself lucky because he was the only one who knew how beautiful she was, and for that reason, he could keep all that beauty just for himself. That, he said, made him very happy. Usagi's bold and charming words left Mashiro completely stunned. For a few moments, she tried to process what she had just heard, and as she did, her mind seemed to explode, and her face turned a deep shade of red. Usagi, unaware of the effect he had caused, asked what her answer would be. Mashiro, after reflecting for a moment, nervously and blushing, unexpectedly asked if he wasn't thinking about kissing her, or if he preferred that she do it instead. And speechless. The question left Usagi. Suddenly, Mashiro stepped closer with an intense, penetrating gaze filled with a strange emotion, staring at him with visible excitement. Usagi, trying to stay composed, argued that it was all too sudden. But Mashiro, undeterred, took the initiative. Breaking through his hesitation and refusing to back down, she declared loudly that after hearing his words, not even he could stop her. She added that she was unique and wanted to savor this moment to the fullest. Usagi, completely overwhelmed by the situation, couldn't respond to Mashiro's determined attitude. His face turned intensely red as she moved even closer, leaving him struggling to process everything that was happening. Mashiro, on the other hand, seemed incredibly energized. Usagi was on the verge of giving in, but unable to withstand the pressure, he fainted. Now calmer, Mashiro observed curiously, wondering if Usagi had trouble dealing with being close to girls. Frustrated, she let out a sigh, lamenting that she hadn't been able to do anything. Afterward, she took him to the infirmary. The next day, Mashiro reflected on how impulsive she had been the day before. Even so, she tried to convince herself that he was the one at fault, thinking he had approached her on a bet and not because he truly liked her. At that moment, Usagi entered the classroom and greeted her with a smile. She replied shyly. Shortly after, Nikaido arrived and greeted Usagi enthusiastically. That scene was precisely what made Mashiro doubt that Usagi could genuinely like her. Usagi, Gentaro, and Nikaido Emma were childhood friends and clearly got along well. Nikaido was stunningly beautiful, with impeccable style, even her perfume was divine, the opposite of Mashiro. This made Mashiro question why Usagi would choose her. As she watched them, Mashiro saw Nikaido sit very close to Usagi, which stirred an uncomfortable feeling inside her. Even so, she began telling herself that she didn't care what they did or the relationship they had. After all, the sweet things Usagi had said the day before couldn't possibly be true. And even if they were, he was so attractive that it would be impossible for her to compete with other girls as beautiful as the ones who were likely drawn to him, like Nikaido. Mashiro suddenly stood up from her seat and began walking away, repeating to herself over and over that she didn't care. However, impulsively, Mashiro ended up stopping right in front of the two, fixing her gaze on Nikaido. Noticing her presence, Nikaido asked if something was wrong. That's when Mashiro, without thinking too much, asked a direct question: were they dating? The question caught both of them off guard. Nikaido, excited, responded by asking if it looked that way, while Usagi categorically denied it, clarifying that they were just childhood friends. His denial left them in an awkward silence. Finally, with a smile, Nikaido added that, unfortunately, Usagi wouldn't date a girl unless she was more beautiful than herself, which, according to her own words, was impossible. Faced with this, Nikaido urged Mashiro not to try to get close to Usagi. Additionally, she scolded her for asking such a question, arguing that it wasn't her business. In response, Mashiro asked another question that left Nikaido completely stunned. She wanted to know how far the two of them had gone. Without pausing, Mashiro kept speaking and, with apparent nonchalance, commented that although she didn't think it was a big deal, she wanted to share something. She leaned toward Nikaido and whispered that, in fact, she had managed to make Usagi lose control with just a kiss. Mashiro was clearly referring to the nosebleed Usagi had experienced when she tried to kiss him the day before, but she omitted that part. The confession caused a great stir. Nikaido was shocked while Usagi blushed intensely. Bewildered, Nikaido looked at Seijai and asked if it was true. Unable to respond, he simply covered his face in shame. To conclude, Mashiro approached Usagi, pulled her close, and with her usual piercing gaze, sarcastically apologized to Nikaido, claiming that, unfortunately, Seijai had been with her. Shortly after, Mashiro left, leaving Seijai completely stunned, as the contact with her had left him utterly incapacitated. Nikaido, outraged and perplexed, threw several questions into the air, trying to understand who that girl was and demanding explanations. However, none of her questions could be answered, as Seijai remained unconscious. Moments later, Mashiro began to regret her actions. It seemed she had been carried away by the moment and acted that way, despite everything having started as a simple bet with Usagi. She considered herself naive for believing those two were merely playing with her. Mashiro tried to get up to leave, but at that moment, Seijai appeared, saying he had been looking for her everywhere. Confused, Mashiro asked the reason, and it was then that he, with seriousness, confessed again that he liked her. Seijai added to make it clear that he and Nikaido were just friends. Additionally, he reminded her that the day before, she had not responded to his confession, which is why he was asking again what her decision was. Surprised, Mashiro remained silent for a moment. It was then that she realized something important. Seijai hadn't chosen Nikaido, but her. Despite this, she showed a concerned expression. Seijai asked the reason for her worry, to which she responded that if he truly had feelings for her, he needed to clarify the situation with Nikaido. She added that it was obvious Nikaido was in love with him and that, as a childhood friend, he should be aware of that and care a little more about her. In response, Seijai promised he would explain the situation from the beginning. It was at that moment that Nikaido herself appeared, tears in her eyes, surprised to see that Mashiro and Seijai were really together. Mashiro then turned to Nikaido and said she wouldn't mind if it were a three-way relationship, leaving both Nikaido and Seijai completely shocked by the statement. Sometime after these events, Mashiro and Nikaido were in a car, and Mashiro wondered why Nikaido had invited her, since, looking at her face, Nikaido didn't seem to be in the mood to sing. It was then that Nikaido looked at her seriously, making Mashiro wonder if she was angry. At that moment, with a worried expression, Nikaido directly asked if Mashiro was really dating Seijai. Mashiro replied that she didn't know how to answer that question because she still hadn't given a clear response to Seijai, so she wasn't sure what their relationship actually was. After hearing this, Mashiro began to reflect that, from what she could see, there really wasn't a relationship between Nikaido and Seijai. Furthermore, Nikaido didn't seem like the type of person who would lie easily. With this in mind, Mashiro decided to be honest and admitted that she didn't really trust what Seijai said. She added that he was handsome and everything, but it was hard to know what he was really thinking. In response, Nikaido asked if that meant Mashiro didn't believe Usagi's confession. Raising her voice a little, Mashiro replied that Seijai had said he liked her eyes, but that was something she couldn't believe, no matter how much she tried. No matter how much she thought about it, she simply couldn't trust those words. Confused, Nikaido commented that she didn't understand the reason for this since, in fact, Mashiro's eyes were extremely big and beautiful. Upon hearing this, Mashiro was stunned. There was a moment of silence before she reacted, visibly embarrassed. Nikaido continued, saying that Seijai liked big eyes, which was bad luck for her since her eyes were small and slanted, something that made her feel a certain jealousy. After this confession, Nikaido began to cry, which made Mashiro worried, desperately asking what had happened. Through her tears, Nikaido said that no matter how much she tried, Seijai had never looked at her. Yet, he had confessed to Mashiro, which made her feel like a loss. He would never be chosen. After saying this, Nikaido forced a smile and stated that she would give up on him because she had already decided that it was a lost cause. Mashiro remained silent, watching Nikaido until she made an expression of confusion. Suddenly, Mashiro became agitated and told Nikaido not to give up or cry. She said that if Nikaido had always loved Seijai, she couldn't just give up because someone like her had appeared. She continued by saying that, unlike herself, Nikaido was really beautiful, and if she were Seijai, she would never let her go and would look for her every day. Surprised by these unexpected words of encouragement, Nikaido remained silent, perplexed by Mashiro's reaction. Meanwhile, Mashiro watched her intently in silence, thinking to herself, so Nikaido is really very attractive. Everything seemed to indicate that Mashiro was realizing she might be interested in both of them. On the other hand, Nikaido was surprised that Mashiro was offering support, even though she was supposedly in a relationship with Seijai. Mashiro commented that she really didn't know if they were dating or not. Internally, she started reflecting and questioning what she was doing, considering that she had already said she had given up. If Usagi's confession was real and Nikaido didn't give up, it would be a huge inconvenience. With these conflicting feelings, Mashiro became agitated again and said she wasn't sure but that, somehow, it felt like a waste. Seeing Mashiro's reaction, Nikaido smiled and asked what was going on. Mashiro, in turn, blushed when she saw Nikaido's smile. Suddenly, Nikaido took Mashiro's hands and said that, in some way, she felt more energized. She added that from that moment on, they would be friends and rivals in a fair and direct way, playing around with big smiles. Nikaido even suggested that they could leave Seijai aside and have fun together, although it was just a joke. Mashiro was in shock at that moment, and something inside her awakened. Looking at Nikaido in surprise, she asked if she was really serious. She added that Nikaido was very beautiful, and she had a strong desire to touch one of her blessings. She extended her hands to do so. But Nikaido quickly recoiled, asking what Mashiro was doing. Still with a strange emotion, Mashiro replied that she also wanted to do fun activities with girls. She asked Nikaido if she wasn't aware that she was an attractive girl and that, because of that, she should be prepared for the idea that another woman might fall in love with her. Mashiro added that with comments like Nikaido's, it was impossible not to trigger her switch. With her eyes shining and an uncontrollable smile, Mashiro approached and asked if Nikaido agreed. Desperate, Nikaido tried to push her away, clarifying that she wasn't talking about that kind of fun. Mashiro, not understanding, offered to take the first step, but Nikaido firmly rejected her, saying she definitely wouldn't do that. And it was in this peculiar way that the two became good friends and rivals in love. Sometime after these events, in an empty classroom at school, Seijai was apologizing to Mashiro for calling her there. He said he wanted to be direct and asked if they were really dating. Mashiro was surprised by the unexpected question but soon realized that she didn't know for sure. Upon hearing this, Seijai explained that it was exactly what he wanted to talk about. He added that the situation was still unclear and asked if she was willing to go out with him. He said that if she didn't want to, she could simply reject him. The question made Mashiro reflect. She knew she didn't feel like they were really dating, but that was because she couldn't accept that Seijai liked a girl like her. Mashiro had never been popular, and that made sense to her. Still, she decided that she didn't want her relationship to end that way, as she had a strong desire to cause some mischief. With that in mind, she agreed. This made Seijai very happy. On the other hand, Mashiro tried to convince Seijai hadn't been motivated solely by carnal desires, but also by the desire to find out if Seijai was truly sincere with her, in love with her. And if everything was just a joke, Mashiro was determined to find out. She denied having ulterior motives but considered the possibility of including Nikaido in the equation, even though she thought there was still time for that. While reflecting on this, slightly drooling, Seijai interrupted her thoughts, saying that, as he had mentioned before, he had fallen in love at first sight and, because of that, he didn't know much about her but wanted to get to know her better. On the other hand, Mashiro said the same, and thus began a series of questions to get to know each other better. The first thing Mashiro asked Seijai was if he wanted to touch one of her blessings. She questioned whether he was the type to do so with brute force or with delicacy and patience. Seijai, bewildered, asked if that was really the first question she wanted to ask, adding that when he confessed to her, he had already noticed that Mashiro tended to skip several steps. This surprised Mashiro, and Seijai continued, saying that he would like to progress in the relationship in a healthy way, like in a typical high school first love. Annoyed, Mashiro responded that she didn't care for that high school nonsense and just wanted to get to the point. She said she had broad lungs and that it wasn't like she was going to suffer or lose anything for herself. Mashiro complained, thinking that Seijai should be the first to take the next step. She still imagined that his confession was just a punishment for losing a bet and that he probably didn't want to interact with someone as depressing as her. Interrupting her thoughts again, Seijai commented that even if they didn't go that far, he was already happy just to be able to talk to her. This left Mashiro silent for a few seconds before her face turned intensely red. With some shyness, she replied that she was also happy to be able to talk to him, which made Seijai happy. He continued explaining that not giving in to her desires didn't mean a lack of interest in that kind of thing, but that he wanted to take things step by step in the right order. He apologized in advance if he was being selfish, but expressed that he wanted to take things slow. Still blushing, Mashiro replied that she understood and that it was fine, promising to follow the steps properly. Immediately after this, she leaned forward quickly in front of him, apologizing for the mistake and saying that she should help him first. Seeing this, Seijai shouted that it wasn't at all what he meant, and it was then that, for the first time, poor Seijai felt the need to give someone a light tap on the head. Well, that's all for now. Thank you for following this summary. See you in the next chapter.